there, and welcome back. This is Lauren Kimball for ANI 245, and in this tutorial, we're going to pick up where we left off in our series on animating a walk cycle in Maya. Now, before we begin, I want to segue a little bit and circle back to custom shelves. In our first tutorial, I walked you through how to build a shelf, like an empty shelf, in this case for Delta, or the rig we're animating with, and I showed you how to create quick select set options so that if there are controllers that you're utilizing, in this case the feet and the root, then you can have just a simple button available to grab those controllers and make sure that you're keying them as you're working. Well, I want to show you how to add other things, other features to your shelves. For instance, when I go to polymodeling shelf, you'll see that next to the primitives, there is this vertical white line that appears every time there's a new segment in the shelf. Those are called separators, and they're very useful when you have different sets of tools within your shelf and you're trying to stay organized. So, I'm going to show you my method for creating dividers. This isn't the official method, this is just what I've always done. So first I'm going to go ahead and click on this gear, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Shelf Editor. Once that's opened, find the Shelf Contents area, and you're going to look for these buttons up here, which should be pretty familiar. They're the same buttons that you see in the display layers, organizing layers and creating a new one. I'm going to create a new layer, and when I do, you'll notice that a new empty button shows up on the shelf. I'm going to go ahead and name this empty kind of container button divider. Next, I'm going to go down here and click on Custom Background Color. When I click that, notice how the icon changes color to correspond with whatever color is selected here in the swatches. So if I click a lighter color, for instance, you can see how the icon becomes lighter. You can use different colors, whatever you please. Next, I'm going to go over to icon width. By default, it's set to automatic. I'm going to change it to custom, and then I'm going to enter in a number like 2. And voila! That is how I create the little dividers. Save all shelves, and now I can create different segments for different options. If I want, I can have my quick select sets on one side of the divider and maybe like command buttons on the other. Speaking of which, maybe you want to add buttons to your shelf that have nothing to do with selecting controllers. Maybe you want shortcuts. For example, one of the options that I get most irritated as not really being included in the graph editor is deleting static channels. Or maybe it's there and I just haven't been noticing it. But typically when I want to delete static channels, I have to go up here and go to Edit, Delete by Type, Static Channels. I can't just click a simple button down here. So, as an alternative, I can go over here and go to Edit, Delete by Type, and instead of clicking Delete Static Channels, I'm going to hold down Shift, Control, and then click Static Channels, and then click away. So again, that was holding down Shift and Control and then clicking on the command. You'll now see that there is a brand new button that's been added to the shelf, SC, for Delete Static Channels. Now, I don't like the default icon, so I'm also going to show you how to customize icons. I'm going to click on the little gear, go back to Shelf Editor. I'm going to find Static Channels, and the first thing I'm going to do is click on the little Maya icon. Now, if I click on the folder icon, it's going to take me to a folder where it thinks I might have some pre-made icons. I'm not that ambitious to want to create custom icons. Maya's default icons are sufficient for me. So these are all the default icons that exist inside of Maya. I'm just going to type in delete, and a little trash can PNG pops up. So I'm going to go ahead and click select, and now SC has a little trash can behind it. I'm going to go ahead and name the icon layer static. And yeah, save all shelves. Now, inside of my Delta shelf, I've got my feet and root selection. and right next to it I have deleting static channels. And that works for virtually anything inside of Maya. There are a few commands that are very specific as far as like muting channels, for instance. You have to have the very specific channel that you want muted selected, so there's no one-off button that will mute all your channels. You have to have targets selected, so you're not going to be able to create a custom button for that, or if you can, it's going to involve a level of coding that is beyond my capacity. But for virtually everything else, all you have to do is find the thing that you want to add. Maybe just to kind of review it again, let's go with animation. Another one of the commands I like to use the most is the motion trail option. So if I hold down Shift and Control and then click it, oh yeah, kind of helps if you have the exact shelf open. I feel silly. Let's go back. I want to go over here to animation. I want to go to visualize, and there's the motion trail editor. Hold down Shift Control and click, and now we have motion trail editor. And if I click on the little gear, I can go to my shelf editor, click on motion trail, and I can create a quick icon layer like m.trail. Save all shelves, and there we go. Alright, so next I plan on taking you through the process of building animation layers. But before we do, there's one thing I want to go check. In our last tutorial, we had taken the stepped keyed version of this walk and applied interpolation. And I don't recall if I had gone in and refined the curves to make sure they were cycling. So this is a walk cycle. Ideally, when I take this animation and either duplicate it or use infinity curves to cycle it, it should cycle smoothly. But I didn't double check to make sure that all the curves were flowing properly, and I want to walk you through how to do that before we get much further along. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one of the feet controllers. I'm just going to start with the blue foot controller. I'm going to click on delete static channels, and now I've got a lot less to work with. So I don't have to be overwhelmed by the litany of different channels. Only the ones I have keys on are going to show up. Next, I want to go over here to view and make sure that I have infinity on. Without it on, the only keys that I see are the ones that I set. Let me rephrase that. The only curves I see are the ones tied to my keys. By default, there are curves that just exist. You can see them when you click on infinity. Infinity is what happened before your key and what happened after your key. So before the key, everything's flatline. It's just a constant variable. And when I'm done animating over here, it goes back to being a constant variable. But it's very important that we visibly see that in order to apply cycles and make sure that everything's working with it. So first step was to show the infinity curves. The second step is to go under the curves, pre-infinity, and click cycle. Next, I want to go to curves, post-infinity, cycle. And as you can see, when I have this controller, very important that I have the controller itself selected and not just an individual channel. That I have my controller selected, I can see that each of these channels is now repeating in both directions. Tap F to refocus my curves, and I'm going to start with my Translate X. Now Translate X, I don't think there's any real animation on here. There is a little bump here, but I think that might have been more of an accident than anything. I don't actually think I need to have a Translate X. So I could either delete this channel or I could tell this key to go back to having 0 value like the rest of the keys. If I wanted to do that, I would just grab this key. These two boxes here represent the frame number I'm on, which is frame 16, and this one's the value. If I type in 0, everything goes back to being flat, and there's not any work that needs to be done to make sure that's working correctly. Translate Y. Okay, let's see what we got here. So I think this is going to work pretty fine as well, because we start at 0 and this comes into 0 before it cycles, so that shouldn't be any problem. No, I think that'll work. Translate Z. So the first key that it ends on This one here, set to 1 and 20, and this one, frame 25, is also set to 20. I can see how the curves are looking. I think that's probably going to be just fine. Let's go look at X. That also looks fine. Y looks fine. Z looks fine. Ball roll and heel. Awesome. Let's look at the other controller. I'm going to go ahead and repeat deleting static channels. And I have to click on this controller again, go to curves, pre-infinity cycle, and curves post-infinity cycle. All right, translate X, same thing. You know, when I duplicated that position on the foot, I bet that's how this coordinate got copied in. I'm going to set it back to 0. Y looks good. Notice that right there where things are a little crinkled. The reason that there's that little crinkle is because this handle and this handle, they're not quite flowing cleanly. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. I'm going to click this first key here, shift click the second key. Whoops. All right. And then I'm going to select its handle and select the corresponding handle over here. Middle mouse click, and I'm moving these handles at the same time in order to get them to line up. So now when I go over here, I can see that the little knot that was showing up, the break in my curve, is gone. So it doesn't seem like it's a big deal right now, but when you're cycling, that can lead to a bit of a hiccup. So you rotate. X looks good, Y looks good. Typically when there is a key here and a key here that are set to 0, you're probably just fine. Same here. This is set to 5, that's set to 5. Yep, looks good. All right, next up, let's take a look at our root. Delete static channel. Well, that was a moot point. There's only one channel that needed to be deleted. Click this. I'm going to go over here to curves, and I'm going to say pre-infinity cycle, curves post-infinity cycle. Let's look at X. Oh, not as ideal. So over here, you can see that between this value and the other extreme here, that this key or knot, whichever you want to call it, it's basically a spline, meaning that this interpolation is creating a nice smooth transition between these keys. However, on the other side, when we're going from this key to the extreme on the other side, it causes this little hump. And the hump is caused by the handles being different. So while this handle is splined, so if I click on spline, you can see nothing changed. This one here is flattened. So instead of going into a nice smooth trajectory, it's trying to slow down. So we're just going to repeat that tactic again. We're going to click on this first key, hold down shift, grab the second key. Using shift, I'm going to select these two handles, and then I'm going to be able to middle mouse click and adjust it at the same time so that it flows nice and cleanly. And now that little hiccup's been taken out. All right, let's take a look at the translate Y. Up, it's doing it again. So let's grab this and grab this, shift click the corresponding handles and middle mouse click and adjust. And there we have it. So just doing a little bit of house cleaning, for lack of a better term, to make sure that everything is good to go for our next step. All right, so now we are going to go ahead and start introducing the concept of animation layers. To the right of our screen, we have in the channel box our display layers, and to the right of that is another tab that says Anim, and it looks virtually the same as the display menu except for a couple of additional buttons. However, the display window has to do with showing like visual geometry or whatever asset that we're viewing. We can organize them into visual layers. In the animation layers, this is actually where you can store layers of animation. It's pretty cool. So I think when it comes to this character, I might begin with the root. So the last time that I was recording, I had used the root to handle the y-axis, which is the up and down, movement, and I also applied some side-to-side x-axis animation. So if I go back to the graph editor, I can see that I basically had this character going from, see, it looks like 2.5 to negative 2.5 on the passing positions. I think what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So I'm going to right click and break connections and set that back to 0. And the reason that I'm doing that is I would like to put that information in an animation layer. So how do you do that? I'm going to start by grabbing the controller that I want to have in an animation layer. So you have to be specific about what controllers are going to be affected by a given layer. In this case, I want to go ahead and use the root controller. So once I have my decision made, I'm going to go over here and click on the button to the far right, the one that looks like a sphere on top of a polygon plane, and that's the Create Layer from Selected. When I do that, 2 layers are created. The first one is Base Animation. The Base Animation layer was always there. It didn't show up initially because there really wasn't a point, but all of my character's animations, her feet, including her root animation, namely the y-axis information, is all on this base layer. But now I have a brand new layer that's been added. And this new layer, Anim layer, only has Delta's root control in it. And when I click on it, notice that the translate information goes away. Interesting. So if I click on base animation, oh good, there's the translate information that we had, the animation that shows us the character going up and down with the given poses, but it doesn't exist on the animation layer. That's so that if you wanted to build off of or create additional layers of keys on top of the y-axis, you could do that. Maybe make changes to it, maybe build off of it. There's an option on these layers. If I go over here to layer mode, there is additive and there is override. And by default it's set to additive. But if I were doing override, whatever keys that I come in on this layer with would override whatever is set up on the base layer. And what's cool is if I turn this layer off, it'll automatically revert back to whatever was on the y-axis information here on the base layer. But I don't want to animate the y-axis, I want to animate the x-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and name this layer root x-axis. Okay, just a little reminder of what's on this layer. And I'm going to right click on Translate X and key selected. And so now on the root axis layer, I have a key. And now notice this to the far right, there is a kind of a green light going on. That just means that currently I'm working off of this layer. If I had my base animation layer selected, you would see that it turns off the root layer. And so even though there is a Translate X listed on the base animation layer, there are no keys. I would have to go to the root axis layer and click on Translate X again to see the key that I've created. Okay? All right, so contacts. We'll go ahead and click this contact here. And another fun hotkey, Alt-I. Alt-I is only going to add a key to the channel I have selected. So if I click on Y-axis, even though it's listed there, you're not going to see any keys added. If I press Shift-E, or I'm sorry, Shift-W, it would have keyed X, Y, and Z. But Alt-I allows me to just add keys to the channel that I'm working in. So I know that I'm going to want to go to frame 13 and do it again, because this is basically where it's zeroed out. Remember, in the side-to-side action, the character is most balanced during the contact phase, at least on the x-axis. All right, and so I think it's 7 is my passing position. So here is where I'm going to want to start going this direction with it. So let's say it was 2.5, right? Boom, there we go, 2.5. Then I believe frame 19 is my other stepped key for, well, not my stepped key. Right now these are interpolated, but this is my other passing position. So I'm going to go ahead and force that the other way. So that's negative 2.5. As we can see, there are some slight issues. If I tap F, that reframes my graph editor. I do not want this flattened tangent, so I could just ask it to be splined so that it goes round. Over here on these ends, I'm going to go ahead and use my little method for adjusting these. Now, this one's not cooperating. I think I just need to ask it to be something first. There we go. When I created this to be a flattened tangent, it showed me the other side of the handle. With only one handle, it wasn't cooperating. So let's try again. And there we have it. Now, I don't necessarily need to be able to see the infinity curve cycled to know that this is working, but it was helpful to see what I was talking about in the previous steps. So if it's really obvious to you, you don't necessarily need to have post infinity turned on, but it can be helpful. All right, so what if I took this and let's go further than 2.5. Let's do 4. I'm just going to go a little ham with it. Go ahead and reset this so that it's still splining. Whoops. Okay. All right, so why did I do that? Why did I blow it up when I knew 2.5 was more than enough? Look at that. Whoa, that is way too much x-axis movement. I wanted to prove a point. So one of the cool things about animation layers, one thing is over here I can mute the layer, which is really cool. When I press play, it stops being affected. The other cool thing I can do is down here is weight. If I set this to like 0.5 and I press play, you can see how it dials down the intensity. If I set this to like 0.2, or if I turn it off, it's obviously going to be off. But let's say I set to like 0.2. You can see that there's just a little bit of that movement. So that's just a really cool way of manually adjusting and seeing what intensity of a particular animation you would want to apply. So it's almost like a blending mode. It's going to blend with the animation that goes below it. And that's also important. When you're working in animation layers, you want to be really keen about what layer order you're dealing in. Usually it's like from the ground upwards. So I usually start with like my feet and move my way up, because whatever comes above it is going to affect what's below it. So just something to keep in mind. And sometimes changing the layer order is going to change how the animation layers affect one another. Now, maybe I'm done with my animation layer. Maybe it's a situation where I don't want it anymore. If that's the case, I can shift select my layers, go over here and tell it to merge. Now before you merge, I recommend going into the options and activating Smart Bake, because if you don't, it's going to try and add keys like by increments of like every 1 frame. See how it says sample by 1? Without Smart Bake on, that's what it's going to do. It's going to set a key like at every interval. But Smart Bake, it's basically looking for these value changes. So when I click merge and it goes back to being one giant animation, it did a pretty clean job of capturing that specific channel. So just a cool thing to explore, and we're going to be using animation layers moving forward for the remainder of this tutorial. Alright, so now we've got, basically we're back where we started with the x-axis movement. If I were to take a look at some reference, like before we go into animating the hips, I want to make a couple of adjustments to the legs. I mean, I'm ultimately going to want to make lots of little adjustments to the legs, but one of the things that is kind of catching my attention is how splayed apart the legs are. So when I first started animating the character, she was standing like at attention. When you're walking, so like if we look at a reference, you can see that yes, the weight is shifting side to side, but also the feet are closer together. They're not necessarily out here to the sides, they're more underneath the center of gravity. So this is a very easy thing to adjust, especially since we don't have anything happening on the x-axis. Couple things I could do. I could go into Translate X and I could manually change them based on what I want to do with this foot. So I'm thinking maybe bring the foot in by, let's start with 3. Press F. I can grab all of these and change their value to 3. And now that foot is going to be moved inward by that many increments. I'm going to grab the other foot and I can do the same thing. Or I could just right click, break connections, or just highlight and delete the keys. I don't want to do that necessarily because I like having these keys that sort of define my contact down, passing, and up progression. So I might delete these later, but for right now, in case I change my mind and want to make some variation on the x-axis, I'm just going to allow these to remain. So I'm going to highlight all these and I want to change it to -3. Alright, and now I'm going to go look at my character from the front view. It looks a little silly, but there's a bit of a difference here. I think it's too far. I think that might be maybe a little less. So maybe grab all these and set them to -2. But the idea is I don't necessarily want them that far apart. And maybe it's because I myself am a bit knock-kneed naturally. So it looks better to me when a character's feet are closer together. There we go. And of course, you see this in references, particularly with females. Alright. Now there's other things I could do the foot, as far as like rotating the foot and making little adjustments according to that, but we're gonna put a pin in that for now, and we're gonna go back to what we should have been working on, which is the hip. So in the last tutorial, I had gone over to my display layers, turned on controllers, and selected this kind of secondary pelvis controller, right click, and removed it from the display layer so that it is available for me to start animating on. I'm going to go ahead and go to the animation section. I'm going to click on this pelvis and I'm going to create a new animation layer. And I'll just go ahead and call it pelvis. Right, and I'm ultimately going to want to go back to the controls and I'm going to want to, I'm trying to think how I want to go about this. So over here, there is the main controller that I'm basically using for translate, and then I've decided to use the secondary controller for rotate. So I'm separating my channels a little bit, gives me a little bit more control, makes it a little less likely that I'm going to run into issues like gimbal lock later. So I'm just thinking there's 2 controllers I could use here. One of them is Delta's chest, like as a whole, this larger controller. There's also a secondary chest controller. I know they look fairly identical, but there are some slight differences. Like you're able to key them separately, for instance, would be the main one. So I think just to keep with what I'm doing down here, I think I'm going to leave this to be my translation information. So I'll use this to do side to side and maybe some up and down action. And I will use this one for controlling my my rotations. But I'm going to put both of these on the same layer together. They don't have to be on separate layers. They're both my torso. So I'll go over here and create a new layer. Oops, I accidentally created a display layer. Animation layer. So I got these 2 selected, create another layer, and this one I'm going to just call torso. So let's go ahead and begin with the pelvis. I'm going to click on my pelvis, see that I'm on the pelvis layer. And for animating the pelvis, I'm going to be systematic with it. I'm going to go to frame 1 and press Shift E because I want all of my rotation layers at play. Remember on this bigger one, this is where we were doing translate, so this is where on my main controller is where all my side to side and up to down action are. Now it looks like when I baked, or merged my layers, which is kind of a form of baking, I went ahead and reactivate a lot of these channels that are static. So I'm going to go ahead and click on delete static channels. X and Y are what is being addressed here. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on the hip itself, and I'm going to go back to my display layers and turn that off. Oh right, I forgot to take these two controllers out. I'm going to grab my torso, shift select my second torso, right click, and remove selected controllers from the controller layer. They'll come in handy later. Alright, so let's start with Y, because Y is going to be the easiest. And I want to go back to stepped key mode. Obviously, it would be a real pain in the butt to go in and take all the channels that I already meticulously adjusted and interpolated and ask them to be stepped again. Fortunately, there is a super cool feature. I'm going to right click here on the timeline and I'm going to enable stepped preview, and that's enable stepped preview. When I activate that and I press play, it goes back to stepped key mode. So now there's like 3 to 4 frame blanks in between each of these positions. So even though when I click on the main controller, you can clearly see that interpolation is still at play, it's only going to be previewed through stepped keyed. So very cool. Alright, so I'm going to begin with my y-axis because y-axis is going to be probably the easiest. And I'm just going to rotate my hip. Let's say, I don't know, maybe -15. So typically the hips are going to be rotated the furthest, at least on the y-axis, when the legs are furthest apart, which makes sense because, you got one leg going this way, one that way, and obviously the hip is going to want to angle accordingly. I'm going to middle mouse click over here to frame 25 and press Alt-I. And on frame 13, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to mouse click 13, Alt-I, and on this one, I'm going to switch sides. So instead of -15, it's 15. So now, when I'm on my first key, boom. When I'm on my second key, boom. When I'm on my last key, boom. So you see that side-to-side action has been recorded. Now I know that my passing position is where things are going to be zeroed out, so I'm going to go ahead and zero it out there on the passing position. And the other passing position, oops, I got that wrong. It should be frame 7. And the other passing position is going to be, I think, frame 19. There we go. Alright, so if I press play, we're starting to see some of that rotation action happen. Excellent. Now, if I wanted to, I could do some x-axis work. X-axis would look like this, kind of moving up and down. So probably what would happen is as I'm coming on the down frame, my hip would be dipped backward, and as I'm going up, it would be dipped forward, like just to show that sense of falling and catching, but I don't need to go that far with it, so I'm just going to ignore rotate X for the sake of expediency. I'm not going to worry about it, so I'll just delete the key that I have living there and focus on my rotate Y. In fact, I should be able to go over here and break the connection and make X go away altogether. I can always add a key to X to bring it back. So now I'm looking at my rotate Y, which looks like it's going to cycle nicely. Might adjust those curves so it's a little smoother. Obviously I can't see it in step preview. I'm just kind of eyeballing what I see here. Alright, let's talk about rotate Z. So what is rotate Z? If I click on Z over here in my channel box and then I middle mouse click the OpenGL screen, you can see that Z is going to be more on the rotating up and down, like side to side, sort of like the hip coming up and down as the leg straightens. So when I look at Richard Williams' book, he's got a section that talks about shifting weight. And what's interesting to me is he initially starts it showing off kind of the non weight bearing leg being the one up in the air. But if you look at the reference here, that's an actual, like, kind of a human being life drawing study. Typically, that weight is dropped as the weight bearing leg is, the non weight bearing leg is transferring in front of the weight bearing leg. The hip tends to go down. That was actually something that Frank Abney pointed out when I had the very great privilege to study under him. I had kind of always been doing it the previous way that Richard Williams had used an exaggeration instead of utilizing a more realistic method. So let's go ahead and start with the contact pose, which is going to be roughly set to 0. So let's just press Alt-I and do the same thing at 25 and at 13. And then at the passing position, this is where things are going to start to dip out a little bit. So I'm thinking, let's go with like a 4. And then over here at 19, let's go the other way. All right, tap F and go over here and adjust this curve. And of course, we want to adjust these curves. This one has only one handle, so let's apply a flattened tangent to it so that it can be as malleable as the other one. All right. Now, before I go any further refining this, I want to use this opportunity to kind of touch on the torso. So I said this one was going to be translation, so let's focus on this controller. In fact, this one, just for temporary, let's go back to display and re-add that. Oh, that's why. If I add one, they both go, because they are parented together. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and grab this smaller chest rotation controller, go to my torso, and I basically want to treat this as a sort of counterbalance to the pelvis. We're obviously going to be needing to offset these later on, but for right now, we're kind of going to paint in broad strokes. So let's start with the y-axis. If this down here was the point where things were furthest apart, we're going to kind of treat this the same way. We're going to just rotate it. What if we rotate it 15 degrees? That's kind of cool. Yeah, so if this controller for the hip is rotated negative 15 degrees, then we want to go the opposite for the chest. So we're going to go ahead and start there, and let's press Alt-I. Oh, no, it helps if I press Shift-E first. So I want to make sure I have my rotation channels keyed before I can use that hotkey. All right, and I know that the last hotkey is going to be the same, so Alt-I for that rotate Y. And then when we get to frame 13, which is the other contact frame, this is where we're going to get negative 15. Okay, and in a very similar fashion, at frame 7, let's go ahead and set this back to 0. And over here at frame, I want to say it's going to be, maybe it's 19. Yeah, 19 versus 7. Yep. Let's go ahead and set this back to 0 as well. Looks a bit silly at this stage, but trust the process. Okay, one thing that's gonna get on my nerves pretty fast are these arms still. I'm gonna go back to these controllers. I want to set these at like a T pose. Let's see, how about 35? I'm not setting any keys, I just don't want them dangling. Take care of that for the time being. Right, back to this. I think I'm just used to seeing this in T-pose when I'm animating a character, and it needs to go back to that. So here we are. Okay, so we got this rotation going on. let's start thinking about the z-axis. Because remember, we're not playing with the x-axis all that much. We could, but I just don't feel like it. So I'm going to go ahead and break connections so that it's not even in my graph editor. And I'm going to start looking at the rotate z. So remember, you can click on rotate z and kind of see where that's at. With our hip, it was the most balanced here on frame 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again here, key. And we'll go ahead and key it here, or right click key here as well. Or I could use my hotkey, Alt-I. And then at 7, this is where the rotation over here on the hip is popping up. And that was by increments of 4, it looks like. So let's do the same here and go with like a -4. There we go. And I don't know what's going on with my y-axis here. Oh, whoops. I accidentally started doing stuff on the wrong controller. There's always a danger of that. Okay, let's do that again. Rotate. Back over here to number 9. Press F. And we're going to go ahead and adjust all of these. Make sure that has a flat tangent to it. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and nope, don't want to do that. Just these 2 on the end for starters. And then this one here. Ah, nope. Oh, the stepped key phase looks so silly. And yeah, so our next step is interpolation. Now, before we continue, make sure that you go and save your progress. So File, Save Scene As, go ahead and call this 006, torso, hip, blockout. There we go. You can name it whatever you want. That's just my naming conventions. Alright, so here's all the silliness. Let's take a look at what it looks like when we turn off enable stepped keys. Rewind. Alright, still looks mighty silly. Also, it feels very strange because everything is moving at the exact same time, which I am not loving. Let's go ahead and make some much needed changes. So typically when we're dealing with the arms and the torso, we're dealing with a situation where things are going to be moved offset. So this is an opportunity for us to utilize those infinity curves again. So I'm going to go to my graph editor, I'm going to activate my chest controller, I'm going to click on this up here just so it selects everything, and I'm going to go to curves, post infinity cycle, and it ignored me. I need to click this. Curves, post infinity cycle. There we go. And now I'm going to go over here and go to curves, pre-infinity cycle. Alright, now when my legs lead an action, I want my arms to follow suit. So if we were looking at Richard Williams' book, he typically tells you that the arms are not the widest at the contact frame as they are here at the legs. They tend to be widest at the down position. So that rotation, where it's the most extreme, should hit at down and not at contact. So basically, I want to take everything here and offset it to the next pose being at frame 4. So I'm going to grab all of my curves and I'm going to middle mouse click and hold down shift. So didn't really do much for me. Click shift first so that you are moving everything left to right and not up and down. So now when I press play, that is so much better. That feels like it's more offset. It feels like the arms are not rotating at the same time as the legs. The legs are leading and the arms are following a beat behind. Now that we've done that, though, we need to make sure that it remains permanent, meaning that if I turn off my pre-infinity and post-infinity curves, it's going to just be blank here until frame 4 starts, and then it's going to basically jump between 25 and 1 because we no longer have those little ending bookends that we can use to create a cycle. So how do we fix that? Well, in frame 1, we're going to go ahead and press Alt-I on both of these channels, and I'm going to do it again over here at 25. Now, after frame 25, there are these keys that got offset. I'm going to start by deleting those. And then the next thing I'm going to do is go over here and go over here to my new keys, and I'm going to make some adjustments. Let's start with the y-axis. That's going to be a little easier to adjust. Let's grab both of these, set them flat, and then grab just their handles. So it looks like this needs to be flattened too. There we go. Grab this one, and shift select their second, sorry, try that again, handle and adjust. There we go. Great. Let's do the same thing over here to Z. So you can see that little wrinkle that's being caused by the tangents not lining up. So let's make them both flat, and then grab these. We're just taking out that wrinkle. So now, there we go. We have basically made permanent what the illusion of what the infinity curves generated has now been cordoned off. All right. So far, so good. One of the things that I kind of want to do is I kind of make fun of the Polar Express quite a bit. If you've had me in class, it's because there is a sense of rigidity to those animations, and on top of that, there is no squash and stretch. And I don't feel any squash and stretch happening in my character here either, and it would make me a massive hypocrite to be picking on that movie and then turn around and not have any squash and stretch. Just for the record, mad love for Polar Express. It's just the motion capture doesn't capture the things that animators intuitively go in and refine, so gotta give it a little bit of grief. So what I want to do is I want to take the squash and stretch that not squash and stretch, but the translation information here on the y-axis of this controller, and I want to apply it to this controller up here. Also, I don't want to be distracted by all these rotations, so one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my hip controller, and I'm going to just turn it off altogether because it's in its own layer. So now I don't have to fuss with it, but there's still these rotations happening on the torso. So I'm going to grab this controller, grab its rotate X and Y channels. I'm going to go over here to curves, and I'm going to click on mute channels. So now when I press play, it's as though those were never animated. And that's just going to make it a little easier for me to isolate and see what it is that I want to do. And what I want to do is capture the y-axis information here. So I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to go to my translate y and find it here in my channel box. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to say copy selected. Now I'm going to go over here to my larger torso controller, the one that I have the translation information on. Make sure I'm on frame 1. Go here to translate Y, right click, and I am going to paste it. And it is going to look quite silly. One, it's an additive, so it's going to already exaggerate a little bit with the style of the animation layer, but also it's it's just too many values. There's a couple things I want to change though. Before I dial the intensity of this down, I want to go ahead and offset it correctly. So basically, when this is heading down, or when this is heading up, this is going to be a beat behind heading down. So I think this would be a good place to start. I'm going to grab this translate value, and while this is moving one way, so it's moving up, this is going to start moving down. So I'm going to grab this and just basically shimmy it over 4 frames so that it is more like this. I know it looks really silly. That's part of it is because I don't have curves pre-infinity cycle on, so it's going to cause a little bit of a hiccup. There we go. Now it feels like this being forced up and then it's stopping. So the moment this stops at the passing position, it feels like the chest continues to move in inertia. It's kind of a cool effect. So let's go ahead and bookend these. So I'm going to go over here and press Alt-I. And I'm going to do it again over here at 25. Oh, I don't have to do it at 25 because there's already one there. Delete that. And let's go ahead and post-infinity cycle to make sure these are curves. Post-infinity cycle. Why are you not doing my bidding? There it goes. Okay. Oh, looks like it's working. Now it's time to go ahead and dial this down. There's a couple ways that you could dial down the intensity of these curves. One way is to use this lattice box. It's like the 4th tool over here. And you could dial it down this way. And so when I press play, you see it's a lot less extreme. Another way you could do it is just by clicking R. It's your scale. And then middle mouse clicking. And that's another way to adjust your curves. I think I preferred this method because the scale method that I just showed you could, basically wherever you mouse it is where the center pivot is for the scale. Whereas the lattice box, you're able to grab from the bottom and everything is moving up to that 0 point, which is nice. I think I want to go a little further with it. It's just a subtle, it's just a subtle thing that I want to demonstrate. I don't want it to go too far. There we go. Just enough that it's sort of, it's kind of felt, but it's not like super obvious. Just a little touch of something, I can always go back in and make adjustments if I feel like it's too buried, but it's just a nice little adjustment add in. Alright, so now I'm going to go back in and grab my previous channels. Right click, I'm sorry, not right click, I'm going to go over here to curves and I'm going to unmute the channel. And I'm going to do the same thing here with the hip, except all I have to do is click on the layers mute button. And now, it's got a little bit of extra bounce to it, and we're getting some of that rotation in. All right. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is go over here to File and Save Scene. Save Scene as torso, hip, refine, save as, and let's go back in and just make some minor adjustments to the animation. Kind of polish it up a little bit before we move on to talking on the arms, for instance. So, one of the things that I noted was the character is staying awfully rigid. So, good rule of thumb, the slower a character moves, the more balanced they are. So, the more they're likely to be standing upright. The more that they are moving, the faster they're moving, the more they're giving to their momentum, the more likely they are to be bent forward. So she is not, our character here is not moving slowly. She's moving at a pretty good click. So I'm going to go ahead and use this controller. I know I said I was using this for translation, but it's also a pretty good controller for getting the whole body to move forward if I want to without it rotating. So, or rather, without messing up the rotation animation. I can have another layer of rotation here. So I'm just going to, I think it's going to be rotate Z. No, rotate X. let's have her just rotate forward a little bit. That looks so silly with the arms out like that. All right, cool, cool. And let's make some minor adjustments here to the feet. So just some little things that can kind of help give it a little bit more pizzazz. So one thing that Richard Williams talks about is, kind of offering a little bit of rotation to the feet to add a little bit of texture. So one thing I can do is grab the left foot controller and, oops, accidentally went into component mode. Just tap F8 a few times. Let's see. When my character's ball rolls, let's see. That's not what I want. Maybe tip roll? Nope. Heel roll? Nope. Getting closer. Heel twist. Yeah, I think I want to maybe apply a little bit of heel twist. So when the character is first stepping out, maybe we got something like this. And I'm going to go ahead and key this. Key selected, and let's find it down here in the graph editor. That was heel twist. Cool. And I would say about the halfway mark here, we're going to go ahead and set that back to 0. And then back here to 13. Let's go ahead and let's go back to 7. And I want to key the tip twist. So key that there at 0. And just so that we can bookend these nicely, if I look at my tip and heel twist, so my heel twist has a nice starting bookmark at the beginning. Tip twist, I just started it here, so I'm going to go retroactively go over here and press Alt-I, so there's a key there as well. So remember, whenever there's something you could potentially cycle, you want to bookend the whole cycle. Every channel has a start frame and an end frame within that range. So there's one, and when we get to the other, I was thinking maybe we could have the tip twist this way so that when the character is stepping forward, it's a bit dramatic, mostly because there's no break here for the up pose. So at pose 10, I think we should make tip twist 0 as well. Maybe that's what I want to do. I'm going to take this tip twist, and if it lets me, there we go. Oh, I had to press W first, in case you're wondering what hotkey I picked. If I press Q, it doesn't always let me move things correctly, but W is the move tool, and I'm able to get things done better. So I wonder if that gives a little less. Yeah, I like that better. So that around here, you can feel this ankle leading the action, causing this to kind of happen. That's kind of neat. I like that. And then by the time we get back up here, I think we're going to have it back to being zeroed out. And then when it comes to this area, let's start activating the heel twist again. Middle mouse click, right click, key selected. Oh, I didn't work that time. Let's see if that worked. It's cool. You can just see juxtaposition, just a little bit of charm that added. Honestly, part of me wants to maybe think about doing a little bit of x-axis action, maybe. just sort of playing. I didn't really plot this part out. I was just thinking, like, if as an animator, if I'm toying with different things, these are kind of the things that I might entertain. I noticed that my knee is starting to become an issue. Because remember, the knee is a hinge joint and it's going to follow along with the foot. And right now it feels like the foot has a little too much autonomy there. So if I'm going to do this, I need to go back into my controls and I need to grab my knees. I need my knees. Let's remove these selected objects. Let's start. Think about maybe keying these. So if the foot's pointed this way, then I'm going to want this pointed this way. Let's see. I want to double click this and see what kind of move control is activated. It looks like it's going to be set to object. Let's keep it as object actually. Alright, so this is mostly going to be about translate, so Shift W. Back to 0. Yes, we're at 16. So probably 13. Let's anchor this. Alt-I. What did I tap? Oops. At 16, let's ask this to follow more with the knee because the foot's kind of tucking in a bit. So that worked. Oh, I don't like that. It feels very jittery right there. Yeah, I do not like that. Let me just take that move out. I like that better. Before I get too far along, if I decide I want to keep this, I'm going to need to add those keys to the other side. This would have been a really great opportunity to be using animation layers. I just didn't think about it. To be perfectly honest, I don't use animation layers all that often. I typically just go in and separate things by channel. And I know that I can take away all of these changes I made just by going into the foot controller and breaking connections with tip twist and heel twist. But you do lose that added benefit of just seeing what it looks like without those things, or at least so easily that I could just go in and grab an animation layer and turn off the visibility of it. But despite that, I can still mute the channel, so it's not like completely without my ability to visualize it if I felt so inclined. Let's go over here back to tip tip twist. So let's see about the up pose. It looks like. Let's go back to the other foot. This is going to be the other contact. I'm just kind of thinking what this one was doing on the contact. It looks like it was at about 155. So 0 on the up. Let's go back over here to this foot and find the up pose. We're just going to be here. And this is where I'm going to be keying these. Let's go ahead and key selected. What's going on with this one's passing position was set to, should have been -3. There we go. -3 on the toe twist over here, and -3 with the toe twist over here. Set to 0 on the next up pose. So that'll be this one here. And I'm just kind of playing with tip twist. I think that might be, reframe my shot, adjust these so that they curve together. So basically all I'm doing is just taking what I did on one side of the foot and applying it to the other. I liked the heel twist. So going back over here and finding my contact frame over here. And let's see, the heel twist was set to 2. So that means this one needs to be set to 2 as well. Nice. And then, let's see, heel over here, what's that set to? That's set to 1. So before this contact here, we need to set this to 1. Oops, wrong one. This one here. Assuming this is where we're set to 0. I think the feet are looking good. Just do not love what's going on with these kneecaps at the moment. So let's grab this. Delete static channels. That is another thing to note, that when you're animating outside of the layers, you have the luxury of deleting static channels. You can't delete static channels while you are in an animation layer. So I wonder if I couldn't just take this curve on Translate X. That's all that we're kind of doing here. I had to paste it over here, but change the values. That might be too far. I think that goes too far. I don't think this. Well, wouldn't it be nice if it just worked? I don't know, I can't tell. I don't think it did. Let's see. Yeah, it feels kind of weird. Maybe we just gotta do this the old-fashioned way. Connection. Set this to 0. Okay. Let's start with the contact pose. What was this one doing on the contact? That was 18. Let's go change that to 18. There we go. And this one went from 18 at the contact down to 0 at the passing position. Okay, that's pretty easy. Passing position over here is going to be, for this foot, be 0. I'm just, like, whatever happened over here is what I'm doing over here. That's what I'm doing right now, just to make sure that my knees stay lined up. So after contact into down, and it's going to stay static until the next contact. So this is going to stay over here. I can just put Alt-I, which means that that is what is going to start us up on the other side. So just to make sure, over here, yep, that is set to 0. And it's going to be frame 19. It's going to be where this goes to 4.8. Let's just make it 5 to make life easier. And that's on the passing position. Middle mouse click over here. So it doesn't change course. And passing position. I am forgetting what it was. So it's 5. So over here, this one's passing position should also be 5. Okay, let's see if that worked. It's interesting. I don't know if I love it or like it. Definitely some knee popping happening there a little bit. I think it might be too far out. Let's see, when it comes up here. Yeah, I think this is too far out. Let's do -15. And on this one's contact pose, let's change it to 15. That way we're not going kind of bow-legged. We can avoid it. Yeah. Just adds a little bit more interest. So that's sometimes when I'm working and I get in the zone, I don't always narrate everything I'm doing, so let me just review real quick. I went in, and starting with the contact frame, I grabbed the controller and I animated a heel twist. Remember, the two things that I've been working with for the past few moments was the heel twist and the tip twist. And so the heel twist started at frame 1, and as it went into frame 7, which is the passing pose, it went to 0. And then it stayed at 0 until it went from passing back. So what you're looking at is having it slightly twisted until it goes back to normal at the passing. And then at the passing pose over here, we go ahead and have it rotate into a heel twist for the final key on the contact. Now, on the left foot, the contact happens at the beginning and end of the animation. On the other one, it happens more in the middle. So I can go down here and look at heel twist, and you'll see it's right there in the center. So it'll start right at the passing pose, and then go in here. In fact, we don't really need this extra drawing. We just delete it. And then it goes away by the time we hit the next passing pose. In fact, I would say this probably I don't know which one I like better. Do I like it better being offset by a little, or let me look. Yeah, there's not much of a noticeable difference, so I will just take this. Yep, that's better. Alright, so let's talk about the tip twist, which is the other bit. And this one was a little trickier because it starts on the up frame before contact. It starts over here where it's zeroed out, and because the contact is at the end, I had to be very careful to make sure that these two bookends flowed cleanly into each other. So we go from a 0 at 22 all the way to a, excuse me for my yawn, negative 155 here at 4, and then back up to 0 by the time it gets to the passing pose. So it's the down pose where it's got the most tip twistingness happening on this one. And then this one back here, of course, the tip twist is happening right here toward the end. And it starts at the passing position, or I'm sorry, up position, and it goes in and stops at the down pose before going back to normal at the up pose. All right, so just a little bit of adjustments, just kind of playing and seeing if could add a little bit more interest to my walk. Still think that the knees are a little bow-leggedy, but I can keep playing with those. You're encouraged to keep playing with those. I noticed there is some subtle knee snapping right there, for instance. That could be because I have this set to 25 instead of 24, or it could also be that sometimes when there's an extreme change, that it can cause things to pop. Honestly, getting knee pops to fix are the bane of my existence. It takes a lot of work and a lot of finessing. I'm not going to be super upset if on your first walk cycle there's some very, very slight popping. But one strategy you can use to deal with that is, if it's something that you want to be perfectionist about, is under the controls. There are, in the leg control, there are some, it's probably going to be in the FK. So typically there are an extra set of like adjustment controllers. Okay, sorry for the sudden cut in the tutorial. In the previous recording, I assumed that this rig didn't have any tweak controls because when I grab the leg, there's just IK, FK switches. But this gear that sort of like controls all of the controls, it's not just a select all controls, it also has extra stuff in it, and would you looky there, secondary controls and tweak controls. If we turn those on, this is basically what you get. Turn that on and we get the secondary controls are these blue circles, and the tweak controls are the green squares. I think the green squares are less helpful than these circles. So I was talking about how sometimes there can be these little pops, and if you feel so inclined, you want a little extra challenge to know how to fix them, using these kind of tweak controls and going in and manually smoothing out the progression. What causes those leg pops is IK. You don't really get the leg popping from FK, but FK takes way more work as far as getting the same end result. IK, when it comes to leg, it's quick, it's awesome, it gets the job done, as opposed to going in and grabbing the top joint and now the lower joint and repositioning everything. It's a huge headache to do FK. The downside to FK is that when you are jumping between this, like carrying the weight type pose and the contact pose, that once that weight shift happens, there's sometimes pop. And you can use these controllers by manually keying these and making adjustments. That's one of the tried and true methods for cleaning up the knee pops that come from IK. All right, cool. So that's it for this stage of the tutorial. And in the next one, we will be wrapping up the arms, and after that, I will do a tutorial that goes over how I want you to export and composite your play blasts.